Dennis, it's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Jason. Thanks.
So, Dennis, you are widely popular on YouTube. And before the war, you were a pilot yourself working for one of the largest airlines, the largest airline in Ukraine. But now I'm curious, you are following this war very carefully. And as far as I could tell, Russia is not having a great time. This summer offensive, which they put a lot of time into, a lot of money into, and a lot of soldiers into, seems to have failed. Despite over 210,000 casualties, men killed or injured, they do not seem to have actually had any gains. There's nothing tangible that's really come of this, just huge losses. But what have you seen? You follow the war carefully. What's exactly happening in the East?
Yeah, throughout this summer Russian campaign is really, I would say, strange. Since May, they try to gain more of the Ukrainian territories. They try to occupy Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, and there is the situation now in Kupiansk. What they were able to create is just those pockets around those cities. Very like they're threatening those cities, but they were not able to occupy even some more or less big town of Ukraine. They take villages, they take fields, they take tree lines. That's their only gains this summer campaign. That's why I would say that it mainly failed because they're out of their objective. Well, in August, there was the attempt of Russia to really break through Ukrainian defense. It happened in Pokrovsk, Dobropillia direction. Ukrainian military command was not aware about Russian strike, and it happened. And Ukraine had to use emergency resources, emergency fire teams, we'll call them, like, for example, the 1st Azov Corps or 93rd Brigade. They were deployed there very fast, and they were able to cut Russian forces, and even trap them in the Brapilia. And Russia, as estimate, they lost 3,000 troops during this failed campaign. Yeah, I was really alerted about this breakthrough because they definitely reached the new Ukrainian defense line of Donbas, but it seems like they were not planned this operation good, and finally they were cut by Ukraine. So it seems like maybe even Ukraine was waiting for that move. The problem for Russia in all of the cases is poor logistics, poor supplies. Even in that operation, they were not like it went across the river. They were not even able to supply properly their group in Dobropillia. There were no bridges. Everything of that was actually hit by Ukraine. So why Russians move with that amount of the forces? Well, it tells a lot about the Russian command competence or incompetence in all of the front lines. And you know what? They're preparing for the new assault operation. I have it from many of the channels from our commanders on the ground that Russia sends the forces from Kherson region, from Sumy region to Pokrovsk direction. They thought that they nearly broke through Ukrainian defense, as they think, and they now try to send, will try at least very soon to send the major amount of the forces. So we'll see again those big convoys of Russian vehicles attacking Ukrainian positions. But those are usually easy targets and were hit by Ukraine. Not long time ago, Russia tried to assault using nine of the infantry carrying vehicles plus tanks into Mirnograd. This is Pokrovsk direction, and all of them were hit and destroyed. I don't know why they do it, why they continue to do it, but definitely those are the easy targets. Well, maybe if they sent 50 vehicles, maybe some may reach Ukrainian positions and land the forces. But again, it brings just enormous losses. Like, what is the end goal of those kind of the operations? For me, it's strange because now there is the kill zone created between Ukrainian and Russian troops. The front lines are now boiling with drones, and you cannot deploy those kind of the forces in the modern day war. But Russia continued to do it, and soon we expect them to do it more because they want to jump this autumn for to occupy entire Donbas. That's what we know. That is what Russia could do. It's not 100% yet, but there are many signals that Russia wants to attack with major force. We'll see how it goes. I think Ukraine is also preparing for it because Ukrainian command also reported that they concentrate forces, but we're gonna like defend Donbas in any of the case, and drones help a lot.
Absolutely the case. I'd be surprised though they could actually make any sort of significant progress. We just saw there's some offensive fail so terribly. I
Mm,
can't imagine what they would do differently this time around. And it does seem that for the Ukrainian side, there's a lot of things work in their favor. Drones is an example, but also things like HIMARS. Whenever we see the Russian troops
mhm,
start to gather around, prepare for an attack, they get liquidated. But I have also read something else. So increasingly in the Russian press, which I read daily, you
mm,
see that there's a city that comes up more and more, and that is Odessa. Odessa and
mm,
Mykolaiv are something that they talk more and more about, which is usually an indication that they're thinking about doing something there. They're thinking about making a move in that direction. Now, how that would look, I'm not quite sure. In fact, oddly enough, I was in Odessa just a few days ago. And I was in Odessa, incredibly enough, with Chuck Farr, my colleague from the Kiev Post.
mhm,
And what was funny about that is Chuck was a Navy SEAL. He was a squadron leader, and he spent many years in the Navy SEALs. But as we walked around Odessa, his takeaway was looking at the banks, looking at how high they are up, the ledges, the ravines.
mm.
It'd be very, very hard to take. It would be incredibly difficult to take, and Russia would probably not be successful if we were trying something from the water. Now we see that regularly. There's things like mines that wash up onto the shore, so we know that
Mhm.
Ukraine is obviously mining the harbor there. But what do you think? Is it possible for Russia to make a move on Odessa? Is it possible for them to try an amphibious assault on the city?
Well, they can do it, but I don't see the positive outcome for them because, first of all, Russian Navy is not free to act in the Black Sea. There was the attempt at the beginning of the war for Russia to deploy their ships close to Odessa. Even back then, they were hit. Ukraine, I think, even used Grad systems, uh, Neptune missiles. Now Ukraine has drone boats, which will not allow Russian ships to operate freely, attacking Odessa. Ukraine caused significant losses for the Russian landing ships, and without the landing operation, I don't think it's possible to really do something in Odessa. So from the sea, I don't see any sort of the perspective for Russia, despite Ukraine not having its navy deployed, like its ships. No, it's not possible with drone boats, with drones themselves. Ukraine still operates Bayraktars. I recently saw the video how Ukraine operated it near Kinbursky Spit, so it's very close to Crimea. I don't think that it's really possible for Russia. And to attack Odessa from the other side, from the ground, like if they really wanted, they need to take Mykolaiv and they need to go northbound at least 30 kilometers, then go down. So it's such a huge breakthrough that I don't think it's really possible for Russian army nowadays. And occupation of Mykolaiv, they were not able to occupy it in 2022. So I don't think that they will manage to do it right now. Then Ukraine is more prepared, and the ground way to Odessa goes through Mykolaiv. There is no other way. There is geographically impossible to go to Odessa, either from sea or from Mykolaiv. So they need to occupy one more city to go to Odessa. I don't think it's possible.
So I agree with you. I don't think it's possible either. But there's obviously a lot going on right now that is changing because the Russians
Mm,
themselves have to come to the conclusion that what they're doing is not working. They can keep throwing men at the front, but they're not making any gains. It's actually quite incredible that Russia is losing a soldier killed every 2 minutes. That rate
mm,
is simply unsustainable, even for Russia. And it's also economically unsustainable. The payout benefit now for being killed in the Russian army is about $150,000, which is an incredible sum. Keep in
yeah.
mind, the average Russian salary is about $900 a month. So it comes out to be what people would hope to make in years and years and years of working. And if you're unemployed and poor, that might seem like a good option. But today, the Russians can't continue to do that forever. So they need to try something different. They have to try something else. In the case of Ukraine, it's obvious they have the same view. A war of attrition is not tolerable, it's not sustainable for Ukraine. It simply doesn't have as many people to be sent to the front. But Russia was hoping to push down the Ukrainians or grind down the Ukrainians by having these continuous attacks, which would Ukraine eventually would run out of people. But Ukraine is changing the paradigm by striking inside of Russia, making it impossible for Russia to manage this war, to destroy the logistics, destroy factories, and destroy ultimately the economy of Russia, which is necessary to have a war. By doing all these different things simultaneously, Ukraine is effectively taking the war to Russia, but also changing the dynamic of how the war is fought. But Russia must respond somehow. It has to come up with its own game plan. And it's clear that at this point, Russia is doing more to try to defend its airspace, and hence why many of the attacks recently have not been as successful by Ukraine, because we haven't seen as many refineries
Mhm.
exploding. And that's because they realize refineries are a hot topic. They are going to be a priority. But what's your guess? How will Russia try to change the dynamic? How will it try to create a paradigm shift that would benefit it?
Well, I don't honestly see the other way for Russia than to announce a new mobilization next year, maybe. And Russian military bloggers, they also say about the possible mobilization. We see those steps even in Russian censorship. They now forbid Telegram calls, WhatsApp calls. So they introduced this Max message to. They try to ban everything, limit YouTube speed, and they want to censor people to share the information. And why is it done? Usually before something, and they expedite those events really fast. Like it was nothing, nothing, nothing this summer. And then at the end of the summer, they decided, okay, we're gonna block and censor people. It means that they're preparing for something. I think it's mobilization after all. So with mobilization, they actually, with more manpower, they may gain some ground in Ukraine, but still, it's not a very decisive factor for Ukraine to lose even Donbas or to lose in this war. So finally, there is no way for Ukraine to lose, as I see it, because Ukraine, after all, is still a big country, still a big population compared to other neighbors of Ukraine. So yeah, I think Ukraine still has resources to withstand those Russian attacks, despite Russian possible future mobilization. So yeah, and I think that Russia is unable also to protect its refineries if we speak about long range strikes of Ukraine, because Russia is big, it has many of the refineries, and Putin is unable to deploy air defense systems. Russia simply doesn't have that amount of air defense to deploy on the front lines, protect every refinery, protect every drone facility, and Putin himself, he is where he lives. Yeah, probably they're the most air defense systems.
There's a lot of air defense systems
Mhm.
wherever Putin is. We can be sure about that.
Yeah.
That is going to be priority number one for the Russian government. But it is sort of interesting looking at this. Is it's clear to me that Vladimir Putin unlikely receives accurate information as to what's going
Mhm.
on. He's not clear as to how this war is being prosecuted. I believe that he really does live in a bubble where he
Yeah.
believes, the information he's given, which is going to be in favor of the military, the myths of the military, which is also part of the reason that we know he's frustrated with the military. Frustrated because we've seen him fire a lot of people. We've seen the FSB arrest, I think, 16 generals so far just in the past several months. That's a lot of generals to get arrested. By comparison, there's not been one US general that's been arrested in the past 5 years. They've had 16 in the course of a few months. And this is all probably indicative of the fact that he's angry at them. They're not getting results. Look at the situation in Kursk. When the Ukrainian military occupied part of Kursk, we saw that they tried, they had deadlines. The Russian military was told you have to get out all the Ukrainians by this date. And then there was this other date, and there's another date. And it went further and further and further back. And they undoubtedly were telling Putin, we're getting close. We're going to do it. Don't worry, it's going to happen. But it didn't happen. And hence, the FSB ultimately was given control of the Kursk Oblast and trying to then expel the Ukrainians. And as you know, unfortunately, it doesn't get picked up very much in the press, but it should, is the fact that the Russians liberated, per se, as they would call it, they got back Kursk how? By bombing the city. They killed off their own civilian population. They just kept launching
Mhm.
rockets into their civilian population, their own Russians, because it was more important to liberate the territory than it was what happens to their own citizens living there, which is incredible, but very typical of the Russians. You remember, even, I'm sure you recall very well, 20 years ago, when they would have something like Nordost, the terrorist
Yeah.
takeover of the theater in Moscow, they pumped a bunch of poisonous gas in the theater, killed a ton of civilians, but it also allowed them to kill the terrorist. And that was the priority. Or look what happened at Beslan in the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing. The Russians routinely are happy to kill their own civilian population if it allows them to achieve a defined objective for the military. But aside from that, that's why it's probably not surprising that they so willingly kill Ukrainian civilians. They do this to their own people. Why wouldn't they do it to other people as well? It means nothing to them. They don't give any value to these lives. But what's your view of that? How do you think the Russians differ as a I guess psychology we could say, or as a military service and how it prosecutes this war from the Ukrainian military?
Yeah, I think it's all about negative selection in Russia. Those generals, first of all, they have this Soviet mindset to achieve the goal, whatever reason. Second, it's negative selection, I call it, from Putin and his team. So they select not the competent people, but loyal. And those loyal people, they have the same deputies, same mind thinking, and like a red flag could be that not long time ago I saw the video of Gerasimov's cabinet, his meeting with deputies, the head of the Russian army, Gerasimov, not the defense minister, but the general commander, like Ukrainian Syrsky, for example. So there was the big map, really huge, almost covering full wall on the background. And Russia marked all of the territories in the gray zone, which they were there with a small sabotage group, but they were repelled. But still, they mark everything with the red color, with the Russian gains. And it was so much like so more than we see on even on the Russian maps that are published by Russian military bloggers, and even they were laughing about this stuff. So, and I believe that those maps they are going to Putin. That there is the Russian presence in Kupiansk. They almost took Kupiansk, like half of the town or city, yeah, was taken. Then, in fact, Russians didn't enter there. They sent like a couple of the soldiers with the flag operations. Then we saw the other day videos how Ukrainians killed those Russians and took their flags and showing those flags. But for Russia, they mark those on their maps as the taking ground. And it tells a lot. Like Gerasimov wants to receive good news. He likes to send good news to Putin. And Putin is, oh, we are like winning. But it is his mistake. He appointed those people, Gerasimov, and before it was Shoigu. Now it's the new defense minister, but it doesn't change the picture because the system itself it's rotted down. So it's not possible to operate this kind of the system built on loyalism and the information which is coming that they want to hear, like those chiefs they want to hear, and that is what they get. And that's why we see those Russian flag operations useless, absolutely. Then Russians sent across the front lines one Russian, two Russian soldiers. They sneak during the nighttime using this anti-drone clothes. They take the picture with the flag, and they don't need are not needed any longer. But Russians generals they may mark new points, put more red color. And by the time, by the way, in that map, I saw that Mykolaiv and Odessa Oblast as a part of Russia. They marked. It's very interesting. And also, there was the head of the Russian Parliament Military Committee who said that Russia should liberate Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Odessa regions too. So yeah, so it's not just about those five regions, as even our European or American partners say. It's not a local war. No, it's the big scale war and attempt of Russia to restore the previous world order of the Soviet Union or something.
It is sort of delusional and hard to believe that they
Hmm.
believe it, but it's true. They believe it. And so that's actually why I'm absolutely beyond convinced that this war it cannot end by a negotiated peace, because ultimately they believe something's delusional. They believe something that is crazy. And when you believe that, you're not dealing with rational actors. You're not dealing with people who are coming to this with some sort of serious understanding. Think about this. Vladimir Putin is going to these negotiations, and apparently the Russians have demanded things like the rest of Oblast, which they currently don't even occupy. Why would Ukraine just give away territory which it's holding? It's because he believes they currently hold it. He doesn't realize they don't hold it. He seriously thinks they hold it, which is part of the problem here is that he is so disconnected from reality. He believes this is all factual. And that's why he can't believe that nobody's willing to acquiesce to what he wants. To him, it seems very natural. We already have it, though. What's the problem? So when you think about this, consider this also how he makes a lot of other decisions, like what's going on with their military. He truly believes he's currently at war with NATO. He believes that NATO is actively fighting, which is the justification his generals give. Because then it's not them. It's not the Ukrainians either, because he doesn't believe the Ukrainians would stand up. It's NATO who's stopping us. And that's something that is more palpable, something more acceptable to his ears. But it's all myths. So if somebody's dealing with myths, somebody's dealing with just lies, how do you convince them to realize that this is just insanity? You can't readily convince them, is the fact. It's going to be very, very, very difficult. And so Putin at no stage is going to want to end this war for a reason that we can offer, something like a peace deal. Because why would he need that if they're currently winning? Things are going just great. But what's your view? Do you think that's pretty much how it's going? Or do you think that no, Putin probably has a better understanding and I'm just not giving him enough credit?
Yeah, I agree with you that he in his mind he is winning. About Donetsk Oblast, I think they want to get it under control without the fight because with the fight they cannot get it. We witnessed that this summer shows that they're not even close to occupied Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka. No, they don't have enough resources for it. With their volunteers coming to Russian army, and as you mentioned, they pay millions of rubles. It has never been like. I think it's already the ceiling. I think they will not pay more because Russian economy. The first reason and the second reason that after all there is the like all of the people who already wanted to lose their lives for that money, they already like shrinking. There are not many as before. And Russian military bloggers, they also say that it is the case, and probably that is the main factor to announce a new mobilization. But I wouldn't connect even the massive mobilization for Russia to the situation on the front line. I would connect it more to Putin. If he thinks that it is needed, he may announce it. Yeah, I think he will announce it because his goal is just to continue the war as we see. Sadly, I don't see the end of the town, despite all of those, agreements. The coalition of the willing meetings, the meetings between Putin, Trump, and Russian, Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul. I don't see real actions towards peace. I see just escalation for now, and it may continue for a long time, unfortunately. Because Russian economy, yes, struggles, but in my opinion, that it still has inertia, it still has support from China, India, and North Korea from military perspective. Yeah, so it may continue for a while, like for a few more years, I think at least. Unfortunately, but Ukraine does proper step to hit Russian facilities. That's the goal. But yeah, I agree with you that Putin lives in an informational bubble created by his own incompetence surrounding because he is incompetent himself. And I think it was the main reason actually for him to start this war was his internal isolation from people, from actual truth, what is going on in Ukraine, how Ukrainians could resist or not, because this war was started as the blitzkrieg, which failed. It is clear that it was started because you never deploy that amount of the forces to occupy that big country. So he expected Ukraine to fall down in a matter of days. It didn't happen because his FSB or intelligence, they provided fake information to Putin and continue to do so. Negative selection, I would say, and delusional Russian control. But they have something in this mind. They want to restore Soviet Empire. They want to occupy Ukraine. And for Russia, Ukraine, I think it should not exist or be like puppet regime, like Belarus, something like this. That's why I don't say that Putin may turn from this war action in a nearby perspective. Unfortunately.
No, I think you're right. Unfortunately, I think you're totally right. And I think it's very unfortunate, but we're no closer to peace now than we were 2 years
Hmm.
ago. The
Yeah.
fact is, the Russians are going to continue this. Vladimir Putin is sort of the key part of this, though, which is why I think it's so interesting to look at him specifically. I was talking the other day with a friend of mine in Kiev, Ilya Ponomarov, who, as you know, is the former Russian member of parliament. He was the only one to vote against the annexation of Crimea. And so he was forced to leave Russia back in
Hmm.
2014. Now he lives in Ukraine. He's been there for years and years. Speaks really good Ukrainian, but that's beside the point. Is Ilya, though, we're discussing specifically Putin, because Ilya has known Putin or knew Putin, past tense, for decades, because he was a member of parliament. In fact, Ilya's mother was a member of the Senate of Russia. His father was an ambassador. His grandfather was an ambassador. His great grandfather grew up in the same village as Vladimir Lenin. So he's from the nomenclatura, the upper class of the Soviet
Hmm.
Union. But he ran around with Putin for a number of years. He was always in opposition to him, never in his political party, and always was part of the opposition steadily. But either way, we were discussing how does Putin perceive the situation? And obviously, I've never met Mr. Putin, but he has. So he said it's a couple of things that I thought were very interesting. I'd be curious what you think. One is that Putin receives reports. He probably realizes they're a little too cherry, a little too positive. But at the same time, he wants that. He likes the warm bath, as they say in Russian. He likes to be told that things are good and things are fine. He doesn't like to receive bad information. And that's actually a sign of a bad leader. A good leader likes to have even the bad information so he can change course, so he can improve things. But he doesn't want that. And that's why increasingly he has chosen to isolate himself. His circle, which used to be much bigger 10 years ago, is very small now. It's getting smaller and smaller as people get pushed out, and he trusts fewer and fewer people. But there's a second part of this of how his bubble got created. And I think this is particularly fascinating is Vladimir Putin, in his own description of himself, when you listen to him in public, even in interviews he gave about 25 years ago,
Mm.
he always says that he is an expert in personal relationships or human affairs. And what he means by that is he's very good at manipulating people, but he's also very good at reading people, which is a KGB skill. He really was trained in is how to look at people, to understand what they really want, to understand their objectives, if they're lying or telling the truth. And so one of the things is that he has honed in on that and he is very good. And we see he uses that historically for the past 25 years, often in meetings with foreign leaders, specifically to make references to things that he thinks would be able to help him to have more control over their decisions. Now, why that all matters. Back right before the full scale invasion, Vladimir Putin became very scared of becoming sick with COVID. As you know, he was in total isolation.
Mhm.
Anyone that met with him had to stay in a government hotel for 2 weeks without touching anyone else and were not allowed to leave. And so what he lost in that is the fact that he was not dealing with real people. He was not able to look at them, to see them, and to be able to read them really well because he just wasn't interacting with them. And you're doing a Zoom call with people, it's not exactly the same as seeing them in person when they get nervous or they fidget. Why they're doing that. And by losing that, he lost some of his ability to understand what's really going on. Are these reports he's getting perhaps too inflated? And he was getting a lot of false information, including from, as you cited, the fifth directorate. The fifth service of the FSB is the near abroad, the former Soviet states, which had said that everything was under control within Ukraine. They'd bribed everybody, everything's gonna be fine, and this will truly be a 3 day special military operation. But it didn't really work out that way. So, what do you think? How much is this influencing what we see today? And how's your interpretation of the events in the Kremlin?
Yeah, I don't have the access to that, like in Kremlin, but since your reference, I think you're correct in general that Putin's circle during the COVID was really limited, and those few people who were close to him shared the same thoughts. And like this chat GPT or any sort of the AI you work with, they always approve what you say, encourage you. So they act the same way, like no personality in his closed circle. They just say, "Okay, Putin, okay, we're gonna do it." Like every thought was confirmed, and finally, then his intentions, like because there was the gap between 2014 and 2022, long 8 years. Then it seemed like Putin thought differently, like, okay, let's handle the situation in different way. Minsky agreements, like still wanted to use the soft power, introducing those occupied regions into Ukraine, and via Ukrainian parliament using this opposition force, he wanted to put his puppet government. Let's say it was his scenario by the time. But everything crushed after COVID or during the COVID, then Putin was isolated, and he decided to make everything abruptly using military force. It was, I would say, unexpected. Maybe he was also disappointed with Zelensky, because Zelensky, after all, he's a Russian speaker. At least he was. He won the election campaign in uniting also with those Russian values. He says we're gonna be friends with Russia, blah blah blah. So maybe he looked at Zelensky like some sort of the variant to, as you say, manipulate him in his own way. He thought it could be easy to do, but he thought that, as with previous Ukrainian president, as with this Ukrainian president, that finally it's the Ukrainian president who stands for Ukraine. And Putin was so disappointed, maybe, that he decided, okay, we're going to start the war. And his close circle, it pushed him for that. And I think you are right that Putin has more skills in manipulating people than many of the world politics because he passed this KGB school, and we see it in communication with some of the leaders out there in the West that Putin may play them very well.
Absolutely the case. Well, listen, it was great talking with you today. I really appreciate your time, Dennis.
Thank you, Jason.